involves all the world. And in order to have a better perspective of the Brazilian scenario, we're now going to have a conversation with former Minister of Agriculture, Professor Rodrigues, that is going to be held by journalist Castro from Band News Television. Thank you, Eduardo. It's a pleasure to have you in our forum. Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to take part in this conversation with you and Minister Rodrigues and to be in contact people who like Africa. I lived in Mozambique and Angola both, so I feel comfortable to speak to the African communities. We understand a little bit about Africa as well, so we'll be able to reach their needs. Yes, thank you very much. You have the knowledge, and that's why we thought it would be interesting for you to hold this and lead this conversation with our former Minister of Agriculture. Minister is ready to start this conversation. Eduardo, you may have the floor. Thank you. Minister, thank you very much. It's a pleasure. Yes, I thank you very much for the opportunity to take part of the Brazil-Africa Forum in such a complicated time, which is this pandemic now. So thank you very much for the opportunity. So let's break up the COVID impact to food safety in two different moments for you to help us out. Initially, in the minute the food leaves, what was the impact? What was its impact so that the food would leave the farms, would leave the producing countries, and would be embarked to their destinations? And then have the separation at their arrival. How did this impact on the countries that find it more complicated with these issues? More people on the poverty line, more people on the risk in their food safety schemes. So let's try to be very assertive here. So initially it's good to say that the United Nations did a very good work on food safety. For the first time, they launched that work. And we're going to have 10 billion people in the world, so we will need to increase food production by 60%. So why is the United Nations concerned about food safety? Because its main role is to guarantee universal peace, and then they guarantee there will be no peace without enough food. So this would be a central theme to the United Nations. Brazil, 50 years ahead, has technologies that come out today. They're very innovative, and they change a lot the production rates. Any forecast over 10 years is not very good. So we had a lot of institutions like the OCDE, the U.S. Agriculture Department looking 10 years ahead. And all this research shows that actually the main concern of mankind now in the 21st century would be to make comparable the food demand to the growing population with the conservation of natural resources, because the pandemics actually, Eduardo, consolidated this all. Pandemic changed food safety into the following way, that we have two windows here open to the world by the pandemics. One is food safety. Second is sustainability, with emphasis to the environment defense. So these two themes have grown a lot in dimension globally. How are things working today after 8 months of pandemic in Brazil, for instance? Brazil had an interesting role. Nobody actually trusted our infrastructure, in our capacity to run the production process. And Up to 31st of September this year, with 6 months of vigorous pandemic, Brazil was one of the few in the world that increased their exports of food. And the numbers are hallucinating. Soybeans, up to September last year, we had 74 millions of tons, now 94 million. So 20 million tons during the pandemic. Sugar, from 13 to 22 million tons. Meat as well, 5.6 million tons. So the main central products that the world is so concerned about, like proteins and energy, Brazil actually did very well, and with a lot of capacity, generating a lot of trust in Brazil. Right at the beginning of the pandemic, in March, mid-March, when things started hitting in Brazil, we had a bit of a problem because our Supreme Court allowed every governor or mayor to act the way they thought best. So some mayors locked down the roads and their towns, so we had a little bit of a time where the supply of fruit and vegetables had some issues. But the Federal Ministry of Agriculture worked out a solution. Now we don't have any issues, any problems, and we export more and more. So this says we had a issue which was known by the academia, by FAO, by the academia, and now it's clearly tuned up. If we don't want to go hungry in 10 years as a world as a whole, not 50, but 10 years, we need to increase at least 20% in our production all over the world. It's not easy. The US can grow 10, Canada 9, Europe 12, India, China, Russia 14%, Australia 9%. Nobody will grow 20% in 10 years. So all the studies done abroad say the following. In order for a 20% growth in the world, Brazil will have to grow 40%. So we have a demand causing Brazil to be more of a protagonist as the world's main top producer of food, energy, and fiber. We have a wonderful, sustainable cluster and people able to do so. And this has brought us a very interesting dimension with respect to the worldview of Brazil that we knew, the world didn't know, but now it is confirmed. The pandemic now ratified these Brazilian capacities. These numbers are great, like grains, for instance. From the President Collor plan 1990, it's about 30 years old now. We have had the Brazilian agricultural area where grains have grown 74%, and the production has grown 348%, more than fourfold. This number is fantastic in itself, but behind it we have an even more interesting one. In Brazil, we grow 66 million of hectares of grains. If we had today the productivity that we had in the bag, we would have another 100 million hectares to produce for our producing. So we say that we preserved 113 million hectares. Brazil has an extraordinary technical and sustainable capacity. So these 2 points, we're still exporting food, energy and fiber in a very good competency fashion during the pandemics. And this proves that the two main topics for the whole world, which is food safety and environmental conservation are actually passing the test here in Brazil. So for the first phase of your question, what's happening now in the country is very positive. What will come in the next phase when the product reaches the other country? More than 150 countries actually. Some issues are very, very strong ones from the pandemics. The first one of them, which seems to be more relevant, is very patent, Edward, that the world never had a adequate sanitary ruling. The WHO was not able to foresee the pandemic, nor even to fight it, nor even to understand it. There's still a lot of questions about this process, prophylaxis vaccine. The first consequence that we're going to have abroad is that the standards will change. We're going to have more complicated rules, but we are very well prepared, we are organized, and this gives us a chance to evolve.
The other tip that is very relevant is that many countries that are exporters of agricultural goods, they started to look at their internal sanitarian issues, and then first things, many countries they're thinking in not to export their excedents with the fear that these things may disturb the internal market, and the other countries are creating something called a neo-protectionism to assure internal supply with their own internal production. So that's a new model that was disappearing until recent times. And I would mention these two movements. So, imports and exports. These are movements avoiding exportations to have internal production assured and to avoid imports. Well, these are movements to keep an eye on. So So in the last year, we've had $96 million, almost 5 times, considering the 2008 crisis and exportation. So it proves it's a proof of our competency. In the year 2000, 56% of Brazil exportations were to Europe and the United States. Last year, only 36%, so a huge fallout. So it's not it's a fallout in relative values. So the explanation may surprise us. In the year 2000, China represented 2.7% of our exports, so $50 million of those 21 exported. So last year, China was 36% of 96 million. So in 20 years, from 550 to $30 million. So this market is still demanding. So this is disturbing the rural economy, considering China and other Asia tigers, Malaysia, Philippines, even Japan and Korea, traditional markets. So the Asia is nowadays the biggest market demanding for food, and Brazil barely entered this market. So obviously, Asia has a central role in the future exports, but every of this opens a marvelous horizon for Brazil that must worry with neo-protectionism on one hand, and on the other hand, with the sanitarian barriers, taxed and non-taxed, all over the world. Professor, I
controlando o nosso tempo aqui, eu queria fazer uma pergunta.
would like to ask a
Que
question,
já tive vontade de fazer para o senhor em outras
but I
oportunidades, mas acho que aqui é o fórum,
I
no
didn't
caso,
have
mais
the
adequado.
opportunity
O senhor foi
to
ministro da
ask this
Agricultura,
question
o senhor é
before, but this
uma
is the
sumidade no
moment, the
assunto.
proper moment. So you've been a
E quando o senhor
Minister
olha
of
para a África,
Agriculture. So
e
when you
eu
go
tive,
to
quando eu tive em
Africa,
Moçambique,
so when I was in Mozambique,
2010, 2011, tinha aquele projeto
2010 or
Savana,
11, with
enfim,
that
levar a
Savannah
tecnologia
project,
brasileira,
bringing a
que é tudo
Brazilian
isso que o senhor está
technology
falando,
that
né,
is a
para
summary
países
of what you're
africanos.
talking about
Se o
to
senhor tivesse
African
alguma,
countries. So if you had,
não vou dizer dica, mas
I
alguma
cannot use the word
observação
tip, but
muito pontual,
any
olha,
note
não
or
errem aqui, não pelo
very
acerto,
specific
mas pelo
observation.
erro.
So
Não se
please do not make this kind of mistake. Well, this is a very interesting question. So, by the way, when I was a minister, I created within Embrapa a branch of Embrapa in Africa. First of all, in Ghana, and then the Indian Ocean, and exactly because with the purpose to take tropical technology to Africa. But the sub-Saharan Africa is very similar to our Brazilian Savannah or Cerrado. That is, I've created an office, a branch of Embrapa in Ghana to help the Africans to improve their internal production. So aiming in the future, China, for example, invested massively in Africa without lots of success due to controversial reasons, but Brazilian technology is perfectly adaptable to the African territory. So I see Africa as an important region to be developed with Brazilian technology. But can you say something like that, please? Pay attention here. Do not make this mistake. Because, you know, when we do right, we deliver the manual with the right thing to do, but maybe I would like you to say about the problems, about the issues, what we cannot do or what can we avoid to do. So this is talking about Mozambique. In 2002, we had some issues, but there are other structural problems related not to transportation but to the land tenancy, for example. Sometimes the land is owned by the state, so and it's difficult to fund, for example, a land that is owned by the state, so that cannot be put in a mortgage, offers as a guarantee for. And 80% of the Brazilian producers, they are small producers. That is exactly the profile of the African country. So the pathway is obvious, but it's not being possible to develop as a productivism yet. But I think due to structural matters and maybe lack of education hinders the African continent. But since we do have these problems and we were able to overcome, and we're not talking about 6 or 7 generations. You made accounting, so we counted 30 years. So it's something. When we establish something with a big purpose, we will have big results. So Brazil in the 1970s was an important. So the military regime decided strategically that Brazil would not import food anymore. So created a technological plan coordinated by Embrapa. So we had lots of universities in that area linked to this, but Embrapa consolidated the whole process and transformed the Brazilian savanna or cerrado, considered as not fertile, dry, in a huge arena, where, in a huge example of productivity. and helping Latin America, and maybe help Asian, we help.
Deixamos de cobrir algum pedaço desse Maracanã que o senhor citou,
So
ministro,
let
se o senhor
me-
queira complementar aqui nessa nossa conversa?
Is there something you would like to say to complement? Well, I think the only thing we need to state here, we need to highlight the problems linked to illegal things. And lack of legislation to address these issues, because there are some controversial endeavors that disturbs the image of the Brazilian agribusiness. And I think we must enforce the law, and then no one can hinder Brazil anymore.
Pelas informações que o senhor
So,
traz, mas também pelo entusiasmo
I would
que o
like
senhor defende,
to
não só o setor,
thank you for your enthusiasm, not highlighting all the
nosso
sectors,
país.
Brazilian
Muito
production,
obrigado, ministro.
and representing our country properly.
Muito obrigado.
Thank you,
Muito
Minister.
obrigado. Acredito que a gente teve uma conversa muito interessante com o ministro Roberto Rodrigues.
I think we've
Espero
had
que
a
todo mundo
nice
tenha
chat
gostado desse
with
essa conversa. Muito obrigada ao ministro
Thank
também,
you.
trazendo aí esse
Thank
contexto,
you all.
não é
Thank
tão
you.
importante para que a gente possa
Thank
olhar para
you,
o passado,
Minister.
entender
It's
o
important
presente
to
e
understand the
planejar
past,
o futuro, não é? Esse o
to look
ditado,
at
acho que é dessa forma
the past,
que as
to understand the
coisas podem
present,
ser
and to
muito
plan
bem
the future. I
conduzidas. Então,
think
muito
this
obrigada mais
saying
uma
is
vez,
very
Eduardo, jornalista da